After seeing Perez retire from his home Grand Prix on the very first lap after having an intimate moment with Charles Leclerc, I couldn't help but feel absolutely terrible for the guy. Even though I've been extremely critical of his performances this year and last year to the point that I'm not exactly welcome in Mexico anymore, I do want the guy to succeed despite my criticism. But if I've learned anything about Formula 1 over the years, a big thing is that driver performances can be about as unpredictable as my bank balance after a good old night at the casino. I'm not addicted, guys. It's just, I find it fun, and I can't stop. Anyway, I thought now would be an interesting time to look at why Perez and Red Bull are looking to get an early divorce. Because just 3 years ago, Perez was on top of the Formula 1 world after clocking in by far his most successful F1 season to date in 2020. And now people are doubting whether he'll even be on the grid for 2024. Well, over the years, especially in his time at Force India and Racing Point, Sergio had gotten used to always being the main man. You know, the guy calling the shots at the team. The number one driver. I mean, just have a look at him versus his teammates post-McLaren. You might be thinking, why post-McLaren? Well, mainly because he got his ass beat. In his first year at Force India, Nico Hülkenberg beat him by a massive 40 points. Now, I know it sounds like Hulk had him in the pocket, but then for the next 6 years, Checo went undefeated by any teammate. That's Hulk, Ocon, and Stroll. Now, sure, you may argue that he wasn't ever beating the top drivers, and you're right. I wouldn't exactly call Ocon and Hulk world champion material, but nevertheless, he did prove that he was a skilled driver. Anybody with a functioning brain could see that. I mean, he beat Lance Stroll. In 2020, he had a virtually perfect year in the suspiciously fast Racing Point, finishing 4th in the championship that year, but not only that, he managed to bag his first ever win in an absolutely insane manner. And by that I mean a Jarno Opmeer last to first challenge was accomplished that day. Although you do have to remember that wouldn't have been the case had Mercedes been in possession of just a handful of brain cells that evening. Anyway, Racing Point had also been lacking brainpower that year very clearly after deciding to get rid of Perez for the 2021 season in favor of a washed-up Sebastian Vettel. Yeah, cry about it all you want, but ask yourself, had you been Lawrence Stroll, would you rather have had a Sebastian Vettel who just got the living crap kicked out of him by Charles Leclerc in your car, or a Sergio Perez who was on top of the freaking world? Or Latifi? I know who I'd go for. But because Perez proved more than ever before that he was not only worthy of an F1 seat, but a competitive one, Red Bull of all teams had a spot recently open. RIP Alex Albon. I say that as a joke, but as it turns out, it was for the best. So because of 2020, instead of leaving the Formula 1 grid like people thought he might, Checo showed Racing Point the biggest middle finger and was now going to compete at the highest possible level in Formula 1 by racing with a front-running team. But crazy enough, with higher level teams also inevitably comes higher level teammates. And now Perez was gonna go up against a level of driver he hadn't ever went against before in Max Verstappen. Now, as you probably know, Max has now become pretty infamous for destroying his teammates' will to live over the years. Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, he made all of them look like complete amateurs. I mean, this video literally wouldn't exist had Max not scared Ricciardo out of Red Bull, so nobody really knew what could possibly be in store for Perez. Anyway, soon after, 2021 came around and it just so happened to be one of the greatest F1 seasons there had ever been, and Checo played a crucial role. Over at Red Bull, Max quickly made it clear who the first driver was. But since it was only Sergio's first year at the team, that was to be expected. Over the year, Max made mincemeat out of Checo, but that's not to say Sergio hadn't done well. In Azerbaijan, he picked up his second ever win in F1, and again, it just so happened to be one of the most fun and chaotic races, or 2 to 3 laps if you will. And over the year, Perez amassed 190 points to finish 4th in the driver's standings. But sadly, that wasn't enough to beat Mercedes to the Constructors' Championship. Now, although that sucked for them, when it came to the driver's title, it was a different story completely. In Abu Dhabi and just generally throughout the year, Sergio had proven himself as the perfect team player by demonstrating the lengths he would go to help the team and his teammate out. And by that, I mean turning into a concrete wall anytime Hamilton came within 100 meters of his car. But this is really where it all started to go wrong. Because while it was a good look for Perez in Red Bull's eyes, he would beg to differ. You see, F1 drivers, like all sportsmen, are extremely competitive. Ultimately, being a winner means being number one, and that applies within the team as well. What Sergio demonstrated in 2021 was that he was the perfect second driver to Max Verstappen, and that's exactly what Red Bull needed, but it's far from what Checo wanted. So at the very first chance he got the next season, all focus was on beating Max Verstappen. In Monaco 2022, that's exactly what Checo thought was beginning to happen. Not only was he gelling with that RB18, but his confidence was at an all-time high and the championship lead wasn't out of reach at all. Or so he thought. After Monaco, Max picked up his game, and after the summer break, the pairing of Verstappen and the RB18 now looked unstoppable. Checo went on to only win one more race that year, Singapore, and while it was a beautiful weekend for him, it didn't at all represent his year as a whole. Because the more Max won, the more pressure Sergio put on himself to beat him, the more he failed to do so. And that was a recipe for disaster. That, coupled with tensions rising between the two teammates at Brazil, began to raise questions about Checo's future at the team. And as we all know now, his 2023 season hasn't been any better. In fact, it's been worse. Red Bull are now working with officially the most dominant car in F1 history, the RB19. Max Verstappen has now broken Sebastian Vettel's seemingly unbeatable 9 wins in a row record, and it seems like every other race, he breaks another. Perez drives that very same car. I think you see where I'm going with this. While in 2021 it was okay for Perez not to finish on the podium every single race, that is not the case anymore. Last year, Checo finished the year with 11 podiums, 2 of them being wins. Now, while it definitely wasn't his strongest season, when compared to this year, it looks like a championship win. Checo has 8 podiums to his name, with 2 of them being wins. With 3 races to go until the season is over, if Sergio lands a podium for each one, that means at best, he can end the year with 11 podiums, equaling his podium tally of last year. Now, some smooth-brained individuals may be asking, well, what's wrong with that? And I'll tell you. You see, again, we're no longer talking about a fast car here, or even just a dominant car at that. We are literally talking about the most dominant and successful race car in all of Formula 1 history. Every single race this year so far, bar one, has been won by that Red Bull. That's 18 race wins with 3 races to go, and only 2 of them were won by Perez. He has half the podiums as Max has wins. If that doesn't say enough, I don't know what does. But I do think it's way too easy for people to poke fun at Perez and laugh at the fact that, quite frankly, he's driving worse than the GOAT himself. But the reason that happens at all is because we all know he's better than this. All that said, however, I don't see the tides changing anytime soon. Really, I think the whole Perez-Red Bull pairing has now officially failed. Even with efforts to bring back the old Perez, or at the very least that's what they want us to believe, there hasn't been any success. I think the damage between the team and Checo is now irreparable. I hope I'm wrong, but I doubt it since, you know, I'm always right. At this point, I doubt Red Bull will have much more patience with Checo since historically, I guess they haven't exactly been the most patient team. I know Checo's still under contract for next year, but you gotta ask whether or not he even wants this anymore. How much longer does he want to drive in Max's shadow? Never mind, his shadow's too fast. How much more does he want to damage his reputation? Honestly, as the races go by, this situation begins to look more and more like the Daniel Ricciardo one of last year. And to be brutally honest, whether it's the end of this year or sometime next season, I think it'll end all the same. Anyway, on that kind of depressing note, that's about all I've got to say. Please feel free to smash the dislike button if you didn't enjoy, but on the other hand, if you do want to see more of whatever this is, please do consider liking and subscribing. But until next time, bye bye.